Jai Yeshu Sabko. Before we actually begin, let's take a moment to think through these questions. So I want you all to find a piece of paper and sit with a paper and pen. Got it? Excellent. Now I want you to think of a leader you admire the most. It could be anyone, maybe a famous historic leader or somebody from your parish or anywhere around you whom you admire the most. I want you to think of that person. If any moment a name pops up in your mind, absolutely wonderful. Now let's take a step ahead. Now I want you to list down things about that particular person that makes him or her an admirable leader. What are the characteristics or the quality traits of that person that makes you admire him or her as a leader? Excellent. Now that you have a list of things listed down on a paper, now we are self-aware now and we have a moment to introspect as to what do we see as admirable characteristics, not only in some other leader but also in ourselves. Here is a small tiny case study for you. A very famous leader, widely known among the people for his passion to bring greatness to his country, liberate his people and bring more power to his people with a very highly influential persona and charism that influenced thousands of people to actually walk on his path to attain freedom. A leader who was task-oriented, relationship-oriented with the charism to transform the ideology of several people. Probably a person to have one of the greatest leadership traits. Can you take a very wild guess as to who this leader could be? I am pretty sure many names might be popping up in your head, but we bring the radar into a smaller portion. There are two people that actually fit into this particular case study, and you will be surprised to know who they are, or maybe not so surprised. When we talk about this particular case, two names pop up into our minds. One is none other than the dictator Adolf Hitler himself, whereas the other is profoundly known as Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the father of our nation. Now both of these people come into different sects of leadership. I'm pretty sure you must be surprised that we're literally taking into comparison Hitler and Gandhi. But you know what? Both of these men had excellent and superficial leadership qualities or leadership traits. Both of them were wonderful when it came to leadership. Here are a few similarities between Gandhi and Hitler. Gandhi and Hitler were two men who changed the history of the world. Both men of strong character in their own right. Two men who draw passion among people, love or hatred, very strong indeed. Both loved their people. Where Gandhi fought against the British to ensure that his people were free, whereas Hitler fought against some suspected forces which were out to disintegrate his people. Both were very charismatically hypnotic when it came to casting spells on people with their speeches, inspiring them and getting them to follow them. They were very stubborn and determined, and no power could make them change their minds when set. They believed in their cause and the confidence they exuded was phenomenal. Hitler and Gandhi both gained respect of their people in a very short period of time. But जैसे कि आप देख सकते हैं, history सबको मालूम है. Though both the parties inflicted great leadership skills and drove many similarities in their charisma and persona and passion, एक जो चीज़ दोनों को अपने लीडरशिप से अलग करती है वो है उनकी आइडियोलॉजी और उन्होंने किस तरीके से उस आइडियोलॉजी को प्रोपोगेट किया. जबकि गांधी जी हमारे देश की फ्रीडम के लिए लड़े, जहाँ की उन्होंने सत्याग्रह पीसफुल एंड नॉन वायलेंट वे से इस्तेमाल किया हमारे देश को फ्री करने के लिए उस लड़ाई में. Hitler directed his passion into liberating his country apparently from the people he deemed as suspect, and he was bearer of tragedy to his race while propagating violence and cruelty to thousands of people. Irrespective of having wonderful leadership skills or wonderful leadership traits, what actually sets these two men apart from each other was their ideology and what they believed and stood for. जब हमें अपने अगले सवाल पे ले आता है, आखिर लीडरशिप क्या है and what can we define as a good leader? आप जब गूगल पे जाते हैं, नेट पे रिसर्च करते हैं लीडरशिप के बारे में, आपके पास कई सारी डेफिनेशंस और जानकारी आएंगी. उनमें से ये कुछ कॉमन डेफिनेशंस है. So basically, according to Google, leadership is defined as the art of motivating a group of people to act towards an achievement, a common goal, or the process of encouraging and helping others to work enthusiastically towards objectives. Or as Alan Keith famously states that, leadership is ultimately about creating a way for people to contribute to making something extraordinary happen. Now when हम जब in common definitions के through जाते हैं, you see these definitions were exactly what Hitler as well as Gandhi did. Both showcased excellent leadership traits. But अब एक अगला पड़ाव पे हम ये देखेंगे कि despite having good leadership traits, what defines and sets a positive leader apart from a negative leader? The characteristics of a good leader. Good leadership has many characteristics. These can include personal, emotional and professional characteristics as well as more specific skills and qualities. In fact, the difference between good and bad leadership typically comes down to fairly simple personal characteristics. This is because a good leader is someone that people want to work for. This means that the attributes of a good leader are the ones which help you to be motivated, inspire and empower their followers. Let's take a look at some of the most important characteristics of a good leader in detail. Self-confidence. Self-confidence and confidence in others are qualities of a good leadership because it shows that you trust your team. It's important for other people on the team to feel important and indispensable to you. This lets the team member offer more efficient productivity and loyalty to the leader. Despite that good leadership qualities are not black and white, it's a grey area. There are good and bad leadership qualities in every leader. You are a human being who is bound to make a mistake, so the environment the leader is surrounded by should be understood. Decision-making capabilities and accountability. Another trait is to be able to think of a future in a smart and realistic manner. You should be able to think of different scenarios of what the future holds, so you're prepared for anything. Any leader who has a vision for the future will be able to handle any obstacle that occurs. They will have the forecast any forthcoming issues. Delegation. Another aspect of accountability is when a leader is blamed and held accountable for their actions and your teammates' action. This shows that the leader protects their own and will stand by them in public. A good leader must understand that they cannot do everything on their own. It's important for you to concentrate on the principal tasks while leaving the rest of your responsibilities to others. A leader can do so by delegating tasks to other people. This reduces stress and gives the team member a chance to prove themselves. Empowerment. As for empowerment, it's very important for a leader to persuade others to follow through example. Setting a good example for your teammates gives them something to work towards becoming. It also increases morale and productivity. People work better when they know they are making a difference. As John Adams once said about good and bad leadership qualities, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more and become more, you are a leader. Honesty and empathy. Honesty and empathy are synonymous qualities that are essential in a leader. It is the ability to tell the truth at all costs and under any circumstance. As mentioned above, a leaders look to be an example, and being honest is a redeeming quality for a leader. Along with honesty, also known as transparency in today's world, empathy is just as important to become a good leader. However, many leaders fail to develop empathy because of the dictatorial methods that hinder empathy. Empathy helps the leader understand their team and connect with them. Innovation. Being innovative means being open to think thinking outside the box and coloring outside the lines. This means that a leader should be open to eccentric ideas and what they have to offer. Creative thinking and innovation are the two principal points that will make the leader different from everyone else. However, there are good and bad leadership qualities, but it's not always that simple. What are leadership weaknesses and the bad leadership qualities? There are good and bad leadership weaknesses. We've talked about good leadership qualities, and now we're going to talk about bad leadership qualities. If you are a leader, then you should look out for the warning signs that make you one of them. Number 1, lack of adaptability and lack of transparency. Fantastic leaders realize how to use a variety of leadership styles depending on what the scenario requires. The one reality is that not all members are encouraged with the same elements, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Good leaders recognize this and are fluid. Negative leaders may be invested in their specific approaches and unwilling to adapt to what the members require. As for lack of transparency, members can tell while you're not being completely sincere with them. There's not often a reason not to be totally transparent with your team, especially if they're loyal to you. Your teammates will respect a need-to-know basis when it comes to where the organization, ministry stands. This will assist everybody coming together as a crew, targeted on the problems that need fixing for the lengthy term advantage of the corporation. Poor communication skill. Being part of feeling empathy for someone else is being capable of listening to what they have got to say. Truly listening and being able to effectively respond. Negative leaders will be most responsive and aware of the ideas that are from their very own angle. They may also push aside differing critics and opinions. Bad leaders don't ask for feedbacks or are dismissive of it when they get hold of it. Bad leadership quality means not caring about what your colleagues think. Inconsistency. Proper leaders lead by example in any way they can by showing their teammates the right way to do things. Leaders who are inconsistent of their behavior will speedily convince others that they are not dependable enough to be head of task. This also shows how incompetent and irresponsible they are. These poor leadership traits emphasize the importance of the leader gaining the trust of their teammates, a symbiotic relationship. Good and bad leadership qualities are also measured by the amount of trust between them. However, if you find yourself as a bad leader, don't worry. Here are ways to improve it once you have acknowledged your shortcomings. Good and bad leadership qualities are evaluated by your peers and your teammates. It would be effective to ask them for advice on your performance. The characteristics that define a bad leadership traits are as follows: lack of adaptability, poor communication skills, and lack of enthusiasm. These three traits are poor leadership qualities that affect the entire mechanism of a leader. It can also affect the performance of your teammates and lead to disloyalty among them. Although good and bad leadership qualities are subjectives, but there are qualities that are predetermined. The aforementioned traits are predetermined as poor leadership qualities. They tend to decline the team's performance. Experts suggest that if you consider yourself a bad leader, then you should look through your past performances and evaluate yourself. It is never a bad idea to self-improve and gain emotional intelligence in the process. Later on, you will be determined those poor leadership traits that are the most tough to deal with. By showing you that those traits are, then you'll be able to understand where you might been wrong. The first step to becoming a good leader is to acknowledge your mistake. So far, we've been mainly speaking in the abstract. Let's consider a scenario to flesh out our knowledge of good and bad leadership qualities. After all, this is the best way to understand good and bad qualities for leaders. Say, for example, you are coordinating a small youth group in a parish who are organizing a fundraiser for a program by selling goodies at a fest. A new youth member is working the checkouts. A parishioner buys a box of goodies from you, each with its own barcode. So basically, the parishioner is buying 2 boxes of goodies from you. The youth member only scans one, and the parishioner leaves, having only paid for half of the item. Luckily, the parishioner notices the mistake and returns to pay the difference. As a president or a leader, you could respond to the situation in a number of ways. One common response would be to explode at the youth member for carelessness and poor attention to detail. However, this would be an example of many poor leadership qualities. For one thing, it wouldn't be a particularly empathic response. It would also hurt the youth member's level of motivation and likely lead them covering up mistakes in future for fear of the consequences. As such, this would be an example of very bad leadership. By contrast, a great leader would try and take responsibility for the situation, noting that this is something the youth member should have been made aware of. They could have turned the situation into a learning experience and helped to improve the members' motivation by offering them support and training. This also fosters a culture of transparency. Traits of leadership, positive leadership versus negative leadership. Positive leadership and negative leadership traits revolve around the person who is called the leader. Every leader faces challenges and situations every day that test their patience, skills, and mindset. There is no magical drama-free team. What positive leadership and negative leadership is depends on how you handle the challenges you face every day. The good and the bad leadership qualities are all that defines a leader, which shows just how important good and bad leadership qualities are. Good and bad leadership qualities measure a leader in both tough decisions and at a deafening lull. A good leader should be able to make the right decision, apply accountability, and be able to delegate. They should also be empowering, honest with their teammates, and encourage innovation. Finally, a good leader should be one of those people to understand the needs of their team. A poor leader would be a leader who is slow to change, has poor communication skills, and lacks empathy. They would also lack transparency, assign blame to their inferiors, and be inconsistent in their workings. In addition, a bad leader would be the kind of person who wouldn't get their hands dirty and remain at the top without looking at their team from within. How to avoid bad leadership traits. In conclusion, if you even have a few good leadership traits, there is always room for improvement. You can always try to push your potential as a leader to the fullest. Consider even developing other leadership skills to improve yourself as a leader. If you have few negative traits, then you'll always be able to start afresh and fix your mistake. As a leader, you will have your actions and your teammates' actions under your responsibility. You must acknowledge the mistakes you've been making and start improving the most important traits for your team. Remember, the best key out here to avoid bad leadership traits is to be self-aware, be introspective, and accepting of the fact that certain qualities are pungent and need to be changed. Being in denial will only push you more into the puddle and stray you away from showcasing strong and brilliant leadership. Because one of the very best qualities of a leader is to accept and take accountability. Why is leadership relevant in these trying times? Leading through hard times requires resilience and more. Any leader worth their salt is talking how to support their team members. After all, these are hard times and leaders must consider how they sustain both people and performance moving forward. Your success as a leader will depend on your resilience, empathy, transparency, connectedness, and balance. Here's what will be important for each. Resilience. One of the most significant responsibilities as a leader is to model the way. People pay attention to you as a manager, perhaps more than you realize, including what you say, how you react, and the decisions you take. Take care of yourself. Remember the pre-COVID when you may have been on an airplane more regularly. Pre-takeoff, they always instruct you to put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. This is apt. Be self-aware about where you may be struggling. Obtain the help you need so you can in turn extend your perspective. Reassure yourself that the stretch you're enduring now will enhance your coping skills and your perspective. Stay hopeful so you can be authentically optimistic and forward focused with your team. Stay in the loop. Also ensure you're staying connected to key information. As leaders rise in hierarchy, they run the risk of being increasingly insulated from key information because people are taught to bring them solutions, not problems. To be resilient, you must be informed, so do all you can to ask for difficult details as much as you seek solution. Empathy. Leaders who demonstrate empathy tend to foster greater commitment and effort from team members. Empathy can be either cognitive or emotional. Either way, empathy is critical to supporting people through tough times. Stay in touch. Be sure you remain connected with team members, especially if you're working at distances. Schedule one-to-one meetings, be on video together, and stay present and attuned to your team members. Ask questions. Sometimes leaders may avoid asking too many questions because they fear being invasive. But in one study of mental health, team members felt better when leaders checked in and demonstrated they cared. Take cues from people about whether they want to talk about issues and back off if they don't. But be clear about the fact that you're paying attention. Empower people. Ensure people know that they are part of the solution and not in a victim mindset. Get people involved in projects and give them responsibilities that keep them productive and contributing. Avoid taking on people's burdens. Some leaders make the same mistake of taking on employee problems. The old adage recommends keeping the monkey off your back, meaning don't take on responsibilities others should own. If an employee has a problem, it is better to listen and ask them how they have tried to solve it. If an employee is an impasse, you can suggest resources that might tap to deal with the issue. If we have monkeys on our backs, they require care and feeding. Leaders must repatriate monkeys back to their rightful owners, says Smith. Transparency. In addition to being empathic, leaders must also demonstrate transparency. Sometimes leaders avoid sharing too much because they don't have all the answers, but it's better to be as open as possible. Embrace uncertainty. Make it emergent. And remind people things that will be imperfect. And despite the uncertainty, ask people to join you on the path and let them know you may trip now and then. Ask people to come with you on the journey for the long-term survival. Connectivity. One of the primary ways we feel safe and supported is through our connections with others. As a leader, do all you can to keep team members unified and reinforce the common goals of the groups who work for you. Balance. As a leader, you also need to ensure you're sharing a balanced message. You need to create a sense of safety as much as possible, but also acknowledge the situation is both volatile and chaotic. Acknowledge the inherent uncertainty, but help people feel safe. Support people most effectively by allowing them to feel both secure and informed. It's a mixed message to be sure, but authenticity is important so that people trust you and feel important. Providing empowering and supportive leadership is no small thing in troubled times. Focus on resilience, empathy, transparency, connectedness, and balance to help people get through challenges and ensure successful performance.
Situations that separate positive leadership versus negative leadership. An employee's idea, the situation. A teammate comes to you with a suggestion to help the team. As their leader, it's something you probably should have done already but haven't gotten around to. Bad leader. Well, they may not have meant to. It feels annoying that they're trying to tell me what to do. I'm either going to ignore what they said, come up with some excuses to not act on it, or find something to criticize them about. Which brings us to the result. Your team member will learn making suggestions isn't worth the effort. Much will go unsaid. Good ideas will lay dormant, and your team is likely to complain about you behind your back. Or you could go another way. As a good leader, it's never fun to face harsh truths, but you embrace it. You recognize that your team needs to feel comfortable bringing concern and ideas to you. So you thank them for the feedback. You also ask a few questions to be sure you understand their suggestion fully, which gives you the result that your team members feel heard and you gain new understanding why you may want to bump an issue or opportunity up your priority list. Feedback from your team is the lifeblood of good management. They see so much you don't get the chance to, given all your responsibilities. If you have made a few mistakes and need to work on your team being more comfortable giving you feedback. Number 2, questions from your team. The situation. A team member in a long meeting asks a tough question. They zoom out and question the value of the project you're all focused on. How did we get here? What made us decide to do this in the first place? Bad leader. Shocked and offended, you think to yourself, how dare they question my decision? You glare at the team member and change the subject to focus back on the original discussion, which gives you the result. A chilling effect sweeps across your team. They know not to raise tough questions to you in meetings and just go along with things. Healthy debate is a phrase foreign to your team. Or you could go another way. As a good leader, you take a deep breath and address the questions head on. Depending on the situation, you either explain the motivations for the decisions they may not know for the benefit of the whole team, or you engage them Socratically to allow questions to them to reveal the reasoning. If the way they asked was disruptive, you talk to them about it in their next one-on-one or privately after the meeting. The end result, your team sees that with you there are no dumb questions and it's safe to challenge the status quo. This helps your team explore new ideas fully and avoid missing the forest for the trees. Number 3, managing the unknown, the situation. You have someone on your team in your role you have never done yourself. You are not familiar with all the nuance of what they do, nor their keys to success. Bad leader. You feel a little threatened by the hire and some imposter syndrome, so you fake it. You pretend to know more than you do and go super hands-off with them. It's their job to tell you what you need to know, right? The result? Communication quickly breaks down between you and the team member. They roll their eyes when you pretend you know what they are talking about. Your relationship becomes adversarial as they try to manage you out of the way so that they can get their work done. Or as a good leader, you can recognize the knowledge gap, you take it head on. You spend time with them to learn from them and ask questions what you don't understand something. Together you come up with a plan you can hold them accountable to for the work you're less familiar with. The end result? You build more trust with them and show that their team has a culture of humility for things they don't know. By having a plan, you can still tell how they are performing relative to expectations despite your relative newness to their field of work. As important as developing the task relevant maturity of your team is, your task relevant maturity matters too. Embracing the need to learn new skills and admit when you don't know is a growth mindset well worth demonstrating. Number 4. Working with different personalities and culture. Your team is dabbling in new remote work or volunteering from outside your region. You were raised in an area where everyone says things indirectly and gently, but your new hire is a more direct. The video captures a somewhat humorous example of the difference. Bad leader. Resentful of their communication style, you blame them for all the communication issues. After all, you are the boss, so they should adapt to you. Using your preferred style, you drop subtle hints that they seem to be completely ignoring, much to your frustration. End result? You both become increasingly frustrated with each other. You feel like they're aggressive and they feel like they can't get a straight answer from you. It makes you both want to avoid the other, leading to poor teamwork. Or as a good leader, recognizing the difference in personality, you make an effort to better understand them. You try to be more explicit in your communication with them and not wince too much when they are more direct than you are used to. You also coach them on how to get a point across with slightly smoother edges. The result, while it's not easy, you work together to reach an understanding and how you each communicate. Finding some common ground leads to better results and open communication ideas keep flowing between you both. Anytime there's a problem on your team, it is important to start by looking in the mirror. There is always something you were doing or not doing to contribute to the issue. Some biblical models of leadership. As a youth leader or a volunteer, you can learn valuable and unique lessons from several biblical characters. Here are 10 whose leadership played a significant role in leading the early church and furthering the gospel. Paul, believe in something bigger than yourself. I have appointed you as a light for the Gentiles to bring salvation to the ends of the earth. Paul thought of himself as nothing in the total scheme of things. He was thoroughly subservient to the will of God, and he was committed to a specific, meaningful mission. Paul had the courage in the face of opposition because he had limitless horizons in his mission. He believed in himself, but he believed in something bigger than himself, namely Jesus Christ and him crucified. Nehemiah, build on what God has given you. His leadership is built not so much on ancestry from the Jewish lineage as by faithfulness. He would build the walls on faith. He was obscure in comparison to other great Old Testament heroes, but faithfulness separated him from mediocrity. God has given each leader specific gifts. Some are not as visible, but all are useful. Joshua, bring the best people to the table. Joshua had been in the presence of God. A theophany had taken place in Joshua chapter 5 verse 15. The commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, remove the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Because of his special blessing, he was appointed as one with judicial powers and responsibilities. He had a special place. He was courageous as indicated by the spy scenario in Numbers. He was most likely the envy of other young leaders, but Moses brought him to the table of leadership because he was the best person for the job. My guess is that he had the skills, the like of which Moses himself admired, perhaps even envied. Deborah, judge, prophetess, and leader. When we think of female leaders in the Bible, Deborah is usually the first one to come to mind. And there is a good reason for that. She was an influential woman who understood her authority as a judge, as a prophetess, and moreover as a woman who was meant to lead the people of Israel. Priscilla, evangelist, missionary, and leader. I'm just going to say it how it is. You are pretty legit if you helped the Apostle Paul with his theology. Priscilla showcases her leadership qualities as being a team player and being passionate for God. Even in a man's world, she is called a co-worker of Paul's. Naomi, mother, mentor, and leader. Most people would have placed Ruth as one with the leadership skills, but when I read the book of Ruth, I see Naomi as a woman who led. She loved, guided, and mentored Ruth every step of the way, and Ruth was faithful to Naomi's instructions. If it wasn't for Naomi, there would be no book of Ruth. Naomi faced extreme hardship and sorrow, but she was able to rise above that, see hope for the future, and help usher the lineage of Christ. Barnabas bridged the gaps of differing opinions. He was nicknamed the son of encouragement. He bridged the gaps between the Greek and the Jewish worlds. Born a Cypriot and reared a Levitite, he linked the Hellenistic world and the Jerusalem church. Even when John Mark was being severely ostracized by Paul, Barnabas stood by John Mark. He was generous, and that in itself bridges the gaps of selfish and greedy people. If God's grace is given the opportunity to be operative, he sold his land and gave it to the church treasury. He was not an out-front kind of person, but rather stayed in the background as a fan and supporter of Paul. The most memorable aspect of effective leadership of a pastor or of a youth leader is when he has survived the polarities of differing opinions and modeled having each side respect the others. Moses, blind your eyes to petty criticism. Moses was seen as a patient leader of a people with little faith. His church was a murmuring people. They complained and whined at every inconvenience. He did get disgusted. Remember, he struck the rock and disobeyed God, but his patience had worn thin. He had enough. Petty criticism wears on the leader. The wise leader will work hard at blinding his or her eyes to the pettiness of church members' criticism. If that doesn't work, they outlast them. Just about every leader has struck the rock at one time or another, but then, like Moses, the same leader usually has the resilience to see through things. Nobody said it would be easy. Elijah, bind the ties of love and courage. Today's nomenclature calls it tough love. Some call it a tough mind and a tender heart. Elijah had both. He loved God. He had the courage to speak to the evils of his day. Where is your God? He asked. Perhaps he is sleeping and will wake up. His sarcasm showed his disdain for those who had forsaken God. In every effective leader's life, there is time for love, but also time for courage. It may not come quickly. It will, however, come eventually. If the leader becomes a whim, he will lose his leadership role. Effective leaders have the courage to speak even when it is unpopular to speak, because they speak the truth with love. And lastly, Peter, bounce back after you're knocked down. In Matthew 16, Peter was both a rock and a stumbling block. He was both blessed and disgraced almost in the same breath. This is enough to discourage any leader. You are the foundation, you are the devil's advocate. Discouraged by the disapproval of Jesus, yet blessed by the warmth and affection of Jesus. Resilience may be the cornerstone of effective leadership. One church member compliments your Sunday morning message or your work in the church, the next complain about you, quoting Carl Jung because he's not a Christian. A role model for apt leadership that you can highly look up to. Jesus. Who else could I be talking about? Here are some pointers about Jesus with the leadership that he portrayed during his ministry. The leadership that forms the basic and core formation for all the leaders of the world. Here are some characteristics of Jesus that he portrayed during his ministry on earth. Number 1, Jesus always speaks the truth. Remember when Jesus calls the Pharisees a brood of vipers? Ouch, harsh words. The Pharisees had great religious influence. Wouldn't it have been a better strategy to tone it down a bit? But Jesus speaks the truth without fear of repercussions. He's concerned with sharing his message, not gaining political support. Nor is Jesus using hard-hitting truths as a way to rile up anger from people already on his side. He's not going for the gotcha moment or the truth bomb. Whether or not it's his advantage, and even if it means he loses supporters, he speaks the truth. Because the truth, undiluted, is what sets us free. Number 2. Jesus asks for more and offers more. We're all like, and people who seek power often base their campaigns around making things easier for us. Vote for me. Your concerns will be addressed and your problems solved. Even if we know in our hearts that it can't be quite that simple, easy can be an attractive offer. But while Jesus says that his yoke is easy and his burden light, his plan has a steep joining fee. He says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Take up your cross would be absolutely a horrible campaign slogan. No one would go for it. But Jesus is playing the long game. He's playing for eternity. The reward is great, though the journey may be rough. But he reminds us it's worth it. What good is for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Jesus offers us an eternity full of joy with him, but not in exchange for a word or a certain percentage of our hearts. He wants more than that. He wants our whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. May our commitment to Jesus be far greater than our commitment to earthly leaders, even when following him is difficult. Number 4, Jesus is motivated by compassion. Our leaders can create amazing change when they allow compassion to motivate them to action. Most of us can understand what it's like to be compelled to act by compassion. We see people hurting and we want to help. But Jesus is the compassion champion. He lets compassion mess up his plans, frustrate his followers, and throw his work-life balance out of whack. We see this clearly right after John the Baptist's death. Jesus withdraws to a remote area to be alone. So often surrounded by crowds, Jesus wanted to be alone after the death of someone important to him. But the crowds of people heard about where he was going, and rather than giving him some space, they followed him and pressed in around him, eager to have their own needs filled. When we're already tired or sad, the last thing we want is to be confronted by other people's demands, and we often react harshly. But Jesus looked out at the crowds and had compassion on them and healed their sick. He set his own needs aside to minister to others, not because he had to, but because his compassion made him want to. Number 5, Jesus forgives. Sadly, forgiveness is not always advantageous to our leaders. Think of debate stages where we see candidates reminded of every time they made a mistake, misspoke, or cast an unpopular vote. One candidate brings up their opinion's mistakes and vice versa, and it seems whoever memorized the longer list of sins will win the day. Mistakes are often used to condemn and destroy. We need to hold our leaders accountable, but true repentance should be met with true forgiveness. That kind of forgiveness sets us free to be the people God created us to be. In the book of Matthew, we see Peter trying to be generous by asking Jesus if he should forgive someone up to 7 times. Jesus shocks him by replying that he shouldn't forgive 7 times, but 70 times 7. Basically, however much we think we should forgive more. Jesus doesn't forgive to be nice or because it's a socially acceptable thing to do. He forgives to set people free. He doesn't want anything blocking people from living in life in all its fullness.
In conclusion, the difference between a positive leader and a negative leader is often subtle. It's all in your mindset and your ability to take ownership of problems and opportunities in a positive way. A good leader sees the glass half full, that everyone wants to help them. Meanwhile, the bad leader is stressed out and can't figure out why everything is always so frustrating and trying to give them more work. It is easy to read and say, I'll be the good leader, of course. However, it's harder in the moment. You need to have a growth mindset, manage external pressure, and fight any imposter syndrome that has crept into your psyche. No one is natural at all of this, so stay positive even when you slip. Teams respect leaders that admit when they are wrong and put in the work to make things right. The payoff is well worth your investment, loyalty, hard work, and seeing the best work from your team. So go out there and be your amazing self. It is always absolutely okay to have certain negative leadership qualities, because to human is to error, and as humans we are bound to make mistakes. So go out there, be self-aware and introspect on yourself, because I know there is a leader in all of us, and we will be going out and doing our best. I would like to thank Agra region for giving me this opportunity to share my impromptu on leadership. So in case any one of you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. All the best to everyone watching this. Take care and lots of love.